Yes, and the reason is because it follows real world interactions so closely. The whole world feels a lot more connected and it feels less small.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sevi Talks, where we cover a range of topics from Genshin Impact to gaming to guests and stories. And if you're new here, you can find this podcast on both YouTube and Spotify for your listening preferences, or if you just want to leave a comment somewhere. I'm Sevi, and thanks for tuning in. And today I'm joined by a special guest known as a lore theorist on YouTube for a lot of Genshin Impact content. I watch a lot of her videos as well. It is Ashikai. Hello, Ashikai.
Well, hello, Sevi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for accepting this invitation to be on this very early young podcast thing. How are you doing today?
It's a pleasure. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing great. It is morning recording here, so it's like a great way to start the day, I guess. If you as a listener aren't really familiar yet with Ashikai, well, you can check her channel out on YouTube, and she's also on Twitter making a bunch of threads and lore-related comments on Genshin Impact. And I personally find your content, Ashikai, like as a great way to recap and summarize and also analyze a lot of the things I experienced in the game that I don't really understand, because Genshin has a lot of terms and ways of relating their building things together that can sometimes be hard to get.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm using YouTube videos to trick you into relearning things that you should have learned in high school.
Oh no. What does that say about my high school education?
What does it say about mine that I have to relearn it all to teach it all again?
Okay, well, with that, I'm gonna get back to that later. But with that said, I want to ask you, before we dive into the other topics, why did you choose lore as your content?
It was an accident, actually.
Okay.
I think it was back around version 1.3. I had just realized that the game really wasn't just gonna be a Breath of the Wild fix kind of thing. Because at the time I was like, man, I've been playing Breath of the Wild for so long. I've completed Master Mode. I really kind of want one more game that I can just kind of chill and wander around in.
Yeah.
And then Genshin, I started seeing beta footage for Genshin. I'm just like, oh, this kind of has that feel, right? This could be fun. Well, I was also looking for a gacha game replacement because the game that I was primarily playing was just unbearable. It kind of fit both, but I wasn't expecting anything from the story or world building. I was really kind of expecting a pretty bare bones Breath of the Wild type of experience. Around 1.3, I realized that was probably not gonna be what happened.
Was there anything specific to 1.3 that made you realize that?
No, I mean 1.1, obviously Unreconciled Stars happened, and I was like, oh, this might have some really cool implications, but I didn't really think too deeply of it. But by the time 1.3 came around, just man, there's something here. So I started kind of getting into more of the other Hoyoverse games, trying to get a feel for what their storytelling style was like.
Okay.
And so I got into Honkai, and I watched through a full playthrough of what was available at the time for that, which was quite a lot, because
it is a lot.
3 years old at that point.
Yeah.
Well, it was 3 years old at that point. Now it's 5, 6, something like that. So I did that. And then I was thinking, I wonder if these are connected, because there's a lot of overlap. And so I made a video on it, and it was an accident, but it kind of took off.
Okay.
Well, because before I had been just posting my daily, PvP battles for the other gacha game I was playing on my channel, and I wasn't really expecting anyone to watch it. I wasn't really doing it to do YouTube.
Okay.
But I was like, hey, I have 1,000 subscribers. I'm gonna just throw this random Honkai Genshin video up here that I had that was an extended shower thought, and just see what happens. And then I didn't look at the comments for 2 weeks, because I was terrified.
But
I was like, everyone's going to think I'm horrible.
Did you see them multiplying?
No, I did not look at the video at all or my channel at all for like 2 weeks.
Wow.
I couldn't. I was just like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. But then when I logged back in, I had like 7,000 subscribers. And I was like, well, I guess I'll make another one.
That's fascinating. And that took you all the way here.
No, actually, around after like my third or fourth video, I think. Well, maybe it was a little later than that. Tectone actually found my channel and he started watching it. And I don't know which video he watched, but he got so excited about it. He told everyone to go follow me on all my social platforms and YouTube. So I jumped from like 6,000 or 7,000 to like 15 to 20 within the course of like 2 days. That was kind of the launching point because it was such rapid growth in such a short period of time. But the funny thing is I never posted a public Twitter. I just kind of had a Twitter where I used to post old artwork from when I was doing webcomics. Yeah. So everyone followed that. And I was like, why do I have 15? What's happening? Why do I have like 5,000 followers all of a sudden?
So everyone just found you.
Because I didn't know what happened.
Yeah. You didn't really have to plug it or anything.
No, I didn't know what happened. I just woke up one morning, I logged into Twitter and I was just like, what is going on?
Whoa.
I created 2 Twitters after that so that I could migrate them around. So my art Twitter moved.
Oh, okay. So the one that everyone was following, like that's what you kept as the public Twitter. Well, that is a very interesting intro to how you started here. I love it. I think that the fact that like you got one video or you tried a video and then it took off. Does that feel like a testament to how solid the video was at first, or did you feel like a pioneer in that no one else had really made a video like that by 1.3? Because I know that Genshin launched and a lot of content creators hopped onto it, but I'm like a late comer to the Genshin scene. I don't really know how like lore or story commentary videos were at the time. Or were you even aware, or did you just throw it out there not having seen anyone else try it?
If I remember correctly, there were really only 2 big players in this space, and that was Cat in the Blue Hat, who is still around and does some really nice recap content.
Yep.
Like everything in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff for that. And then there was Tevat Historia, who was doing a mix of lore and meta gameplay guides and also some occasional theory content.
Okay.
And both of them are still around making content.
Yeah, they definitely
for
are.
Genshin as well. But I think that was like, those were the only 2 I was aware of at the time. But I wasn't really thinking about it because it's not like I stepped into the scene to like become a YouTuber. I was like, I had just been posting for like 2 years, like I said, like my PvP stuff from my other gacha game. So when I started making them, I was really having just like a lot of fun with it. And there was a gap, like there was not a lot of people who were making that type of content, even if I wasn't aware of them. The fact that I wasn't aware of them and I was actively looking for them makes me feel like there just wasn't that much.
Okay.
But it wasn't like a conscious thing.
Before I prod a little bit more into like the YouTube journey itself, I guess I'm interested in maybe how you did before versus how you do now approach the actual lore crafting and analysis of the world building. So for example, like how do you create your theories or the content that you have in your videos?
So I think I'm slightly unique in the space in that I think the bulk of theory content tends to be in-game only or in Hoyoverse only. You know what I mean? I tend to put a much greater emphasis on real world influences, among other things like that, like real world religions, historical events, real people, that kind of stuff. Like it's pretty common for people to say, oh, Tignari is based off of this this historical botanist and he was responsible for this, that, and the other thing, like that kind of stuff. It's pretty common. But I feel like when it comes to lore and theories, not a lot of people go too heavy into why they would choose those.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, okay, so the Fontaine video is kind of like the ideal example because I'm kind of likening Fontaine to a pretty exact time period, but even Sumeru, like we can do a retrospective on Sumeru, right?
Okay, yeah, I'd love to.
One of the things I predicted very, very early on for Sumeru was that it was going to be all about the Persian Empire. And I was told that I was wrong many, 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 many times. And turns out, hey, no, we actually did go into the Persian Empire. Like the bulk of this is Persian. Like, you know, Kaveh is a very, very prolific Persian hero, for example. We've got Gognas and the Simmer. Like these are all very Persian things. But like there is a lot of stuff going on during the time in Sumeru that really happened, right? Like it was called the Islamic Golden Age. When we look at like the burning of Irminsul, right, from that one teaser with Dottore at the end, that might actually have been more like an allegorical thing to like the burnings of the libraries at Alexandria or something similar.
I see. Yeah,
right.
Allegorical,
because like that's a giant
repository.
Good. Yeah, it's a giant repository of knowledge. They ended up destroying the Akasha, or at least shutting it down. Or maybe that.
I always get a little confused, like looking back on that scene, because in my head I'm like, that hasn't happened yet. Were they foreshadowing something, or is it an allegory to something?
So there's two possibilities that I see there in particular. And like if you look back at the Inazuma one, there was this one scene where the traveler was underwater and there was a giant shadow that like came up behind them. And we never saw that in game.
Okay.
So the question was, is that allegorical? Or is it possible that it's supposed to be more like prophetic? Because if you then look at like the Fontaine teaser, you've got, I think his name is Fremine, but like he's falling into the water, right? But like if you watch very carefully, he's actually got like that big that big shadow in the water that comes up behind him. So was the traveler having more of like a prophetic moment and like looking ahead, not to Sumeru, but to Fontaine. And then by that token, maybe the burning of Irminsul happens in Natlan. Right? You skip something. Or it could be allegorical. There's a lot of possibilities. And the problem with Hoyoverse is that it can go any direction, and I hate it.
Do you have like leaning? Like, do you lean towards either theory? I mean, we can call it a theory at this point, I guess.
I would say it's probably more likely that it's allegorical than anything else, because Hoyo also really likes their allegories. They really love philosophy. They really love physics. They really love astronomy. And they really love history and twisting history.
I do get surprised at how many references they're able to pull in from different disciplines. And like, do you feel that makes their world building special, or at least richer than expected?
Yes, and the reason is because it follows real world interactions so closely. The whole world feels a lot more connected, and it feels less small.
I get that. Because I guess if they didn't have like all these influences, then, well, for one, it could end up feeling stale and a bit boring, and definitely a bit uninspired. It might feel like a lot of just whatever standard fantasy plots you have.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Like, if I think about traditional high fantasy, we always think about stuff where, like, you know, you've got dark elves and you've got light elves and you've got dwarves and orcs or whatever, and like they all have their own unique cultures, but they don't feel as distinct as real world cultures do from each other.
Yes.
And a lot of that's because, like, you know, the author's trying to keep some sort of cohesion in their world, so it feels like their world. And it's really difficult to come up with a bunch of different, extremely different cultures, because that means you have to be able to think from every one of those different perspectives. So in a lot of ways, the genius of this world building is the fact that they're borrowing so much from history and real stuff.
You mentioned cohesiveness on like the more standard type of high fantasy. Do you think that because Hoyo is borrowing a lot of these like influences, does the cohesion ever suffer, or have you felt that through your lore research?
I don't think the cohesion suffers because the characters don't stay in one place. And by that I mean like NPCs from one nation go to another nation and they express their surprise and delight about X, Y, or Z, right? Fontaine people go to Liyue and they're just like, oh my God, it's a land of commerce. This is fantastic. I'll make money. And then you've got, you know, the gourmets who go from nation to nation looking at everyone's food and being like, oh, this is amazing. Liyue style cooking uses this. And you go to Mondstadt and it's got this certain tile. You know, so you've got all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to just sit down and be like, oh, well, we're going to create this nation and it's going to have this whole culture around fermentation and it's going to tie into their religion and we're going to base this religion on this and, you know, and then do that another 7 or 8 times.
You also have travelers making it feel more connected than without.
That's usually what the main character does. And in this case, the traveler is like a pretty, they walk that weird line between self-insert and their own agency.
And we don't hear them often, do we?
No, and I feel like that is by design, but you can kind of see where Hoyo learned about how that works well and when it doesn't by just looking at like their later games like Star Rail and being like, because in Honkai Impact, your main character isn't really canon, right? And so like all of the character interactions are like their own individual. So they have a very strong voice, very strong personality. You go to Genshin, you have this weird halfway point. And then you go to Star Rail and they've realized that they can take that halfway point and they've found ways to make it feel better.
Yeah,
by giving them a voice, but not all the time. So like, I'm glad they're learning about that. I feel like I got off topic though.
No, it's okay. I was just about to bring it back, but yeah. So when you do go and like look at your theories and your world building, so you said that you take into account like a lot of influences, like real world influences. How do you go from there? Like, do you now have to support or fact check? Do you have to relearn all that historical literature and events?
Yes. I do. Before I did the Fontaine video, I think I spent almost 2 weeks researching it. I was listening to documentaries, I was listening to audiobooks, I was reading articles, like I was link hopping on Wikipedia. I was doing a lot trying to kind of get my bearings because I was really terrible at history in school because I had a really terrible memory for dates. And so I couldn't remember when anything happened. And what would really bother me in school was like I couldn't conceptualize when things were happening simultaneously around the world. Like I didn't realize that like Japan was completely closed off while the Industrial Revolution was going on. Like I never made the connection there that like that was a pretty modern thing in terms of like years.
I mean, to be fair, right? Like I would remember in my education, we would take parts of the world's history separately. We would never go like, in 1 century, all of this stuff happened.
And like, it's almost always going to be through like your local lens too, right?
Yes.
Like, so I'm in the US, so I learned obviously the American version of basically everything.
Yes.
So it was very weird to me going in and learning about like the Industrial Revolution in Europe because I've only heard of the Industrial Revolution in the US, right? Like we're told the story of Henry Ford. And so the challenges that were in Europe are quite different. And so it was very interesting to like try and learn that from a completely different perspective.
I see. So, like, when you got into knowing that you had to do all this research, was it like learning a new skill, or is it something that you've greatly improved on since your high school days, like remembering dates and stuff and things like that?
The memory thing comes with how interested I am in it. And I think that school was just really dry.
Okay,
So
relatable.
I was just not able to retain that kind of information because it didn't interest me and I couldn't really contextualize it. But now I can contextualize it, and I can contextualize it in form of video games, which is hilarious because the video game then becomes a mnemonic device for remembering real world events. And like religion and lore and stuff. And I think that's fun.
Now you can look at an event in Genshin and then you can recall all the related events and influences that surround it.
Yeah, I mean, basically.
Well, that's fun.
That's kind of how it works.
Imagine if school were that easy. Like, they should have just introduced these video games to cling on to, like, historical events.
Honestly, yes, though.
This is what your kids are into nowadays.
Okay. So you definitely wouldn't have had this because this is a very American thing. But in U.S. schools, we learn about the westward expansion because basically, like, we had the 13 original colonies. They were all in the eastern side of the U.S. And then, you know, over time, we moved westward. And I'm not going to go into all of the really messy parts of that. But one of the most popular units that you'll probably ever take in an American middle school and high school classroom is about the Oregon Trail, which is basically like this incredibly long trail from east, like the East Coast, all the way to the West Coast, all the way up to Oregon, which is like the top left corner of the US if you look at it on a map. But there were video games about that, like CD-ROM games, at least when I was a kid. And they've remade them since then so that they're not CD-ROMs, they're like actual modern.
At least they were modernized.
Like you would actually play a caravan. You would get a character, you would have money, you would talk to people, you would recruit them. And you would go across the country, you would go hunting, you would go foraging, you would lose people to syphilis, you would, you know, like, it was like this whole immersive experience. And then at the end of that, you actually had to go research something about your trip that interests you and then write essays on it, right? And I think the Oregon Trail is like the one thing people never forget because of that. I remember playing these like very, very basic, simple, not even all that fun games, but they were still games where you would like explore Egyptian tombs. And so I was able to remember quite a bit of Egyptology because of that, right?
I do remember having like little CD games of like Egyptian mythology or, you know, some mythology stuff that the typical kid would at least be remotely interested in. But I guess they were never like from my formal education. I guess I was lucky enough that my parents were a bit nerdy to actually buy one of those and like have me try it. But I do agree that it definitely makes things more interesting than just, you know, learning them from your typical lecture or trying to pick it up from a super dense book and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know if you have this in the Philippines. I grew up watching a TV show called The Magic School Bus.
Magic School Bus. I remember picture books of it. We also had a Magic Tree House, but was your Magic School Bus a show?
It was a book and a show. But like TLDR, like the teacher, Miss Frizzle, was like the most eclectic teacher, and she wanted to teach kids science and history and all that other kind of stuff. But she had a magic sentient school bus that when the kids got on it, they could go on like real field trips. So if they wanted to go through the waterworks, it would like transform them into like dirt particles so they could actually go through like the water filtration system. I really love stuff like that. I think it's very clever when it comes to learning. And I really feel like that's what I aimed for. When I do content for Genshin that's not just straight up Genshin lore, right? Like when I'm trying to explain real world concepts, like where the parry came from or what the Simurgh was or like, you know, things like that. Like when I'm not doing things like that, I don't think about it too much. But when I'm doing things that are really rooted in real world stuff, I try to channel my inner Frizzle.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I do feel that, like, when you package the real world stuff, it becomes a lot more digestible than, of course, how you would read it in a book, right? Like, whether you're using metaphors or analogies and just, you know, making it a lot easier to explore.
Yeah, that's the goal. Because, like, remembering this stuff's hard, but it's easier when you're much more motivated and you've got some context for it.
It's fair to say that you do accomplish it. As someone who had a hard time understanding the Pyre quest, and yeah, it helped.
You know what? That's actually normally if you play a video game and they're going to use some sort of real world influence like Genshin does, because like they're definitely not the only people to do this. That would be a ridiculous thought. I think one of the big differences is that Genshin tends to keep the exact phrase and terminology. Most of the media I've consumed outside of Genshin tends to translate it into whatever language you have, right?
Yeah.
So instead of calling it a Kavarna, they'd call it a divine spark or her divine power, right? People will remember, oh, okay, so this is her divine spark. We get that. Like, it's easy to conceptualize. But like, Kavarna for like most people is a very difficult word to conceptualize because they've never encountered it before, unless, you know, that's part of your heritage.
Yeah.
Because, like, why would you? And so that's harder to remember. And because Genshin's doing so many different nations, you get a lot of that. And that was 90% of the issue with the Aranara quest, right?
Yeah.
90% of it was just the fact that no one had a dictionary. If they had translated it outside of, like, the vocabulary that they were using, which was correct vocabulary, like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But, like, people would have had a much easier time understanding that. So that's kind of a creative choice that you can't, if you're not familiar with a word or a certain way that the words flow or certain sounds or certain syntaxes in language, like you're gonna have a really hard time following and remembering it because you kind of have to retrain your brain.
When it was the Pari quest, like, here's the thing, like, I keep asking myself, did the Pari ever explain in near English terms, I suppose, what Kavarna actually was, or like what the other terms were? And I was like, you know, even if they did, I probably wasn't paying enough attention.
So the answer to that is yes and no and yes.
Wonderful.
It
Perfect.
was explained, but it wasn't actually explained in the quest. It's actually in the artifact set that's associated with them. If you read about them, suddenly you're like, oh, right? Because it's right there. This is one of the things that's like a weird creative choice on Genshin's part. Like, I like having auxiliary information inside of artifact sets and items and stuff like that, but I also feel like their method of storytelling is very realistic, but actually too realistic. Okay, think about this. If you read a book and someone goes off on this big, long rant of exposition, no one talks like that. Not really, right? No one really talks like, no one sits there and just like sits there and explains everything to you, or like they'll use whatever language they'll use, they'll omit things, they'll do all that kind of stuff. And Genshin does a really good job of capturing that, and they also do a really good job of capturing the fallible nature of people's perspectives on things, right?
Yeah, so like unreliable narrator type stuff.
Yeah, in literature, unreliable narrators. They do a really good job of that because history is full of that, right? Like, you read history books from all around the world about the same event, and you're going to get very different takes, very different reasons for things happening, all that kind of stuff. And I think Genshin does a really good job with that, but it also means that the game isn't really an adventure game. It's an archaeology game. I think very few people approach it as an archaeology game.
I see.
Right? Because like they took the Dark Souls approach of putting so much information in all of their items. And honestly, I personally don't have a problem with it because I like hunting for that kind of stuff. But like, I understand why people don't want to. I don't really like the idea that really important things that are put into that are like should be inside of like a story quest or something like that. I don't like that they're only found in those areas. I think it's fine if they're like expounded upon, right?
Yeah.
But like, people knew Scaramouche's story before we ever got to Sumeru.
Yeah.
It's just that the bulk of people didn't want to read the Husk of Opulent Dreams artifact set or go hunting and realize that like he was, his description matches the Shake Pavilion. Like, not a whole ton of people will want to go that deep or want to spend that much time on things, and I think that's totally fine. But that's that's how I approach this game. I approach it like an archaeologist.
Well, that sums up things pretty well, especially, well, for me, I haven't had much experience of like items holding lore tidbits or holding references to what characters in game or civilizations in game or things that have happened in game. So, for example, I would never have been able to say from the get-go, okay, I'm going to hunt down for these items and like figure out what the heck they are referring to. And you say that, okay, this is kind of an archaeology thing where the items are actually important because they do hold the records of history in game. That is a much cleaner way of describing the process, I suppose. I mean, I do remember having a couple of days of like trying to read through artifact sets and seeing like, oh, can I take on the lore hat and figure out what this refers to? But then a lot of the time I just don't have enough context to comprehend what they could be referring to, or like it needs a bit more delving deeper into the current information, I guess, to figure out the context that could explain it the best.
Yeah, and you gotta remember it too, which isn't always.
Yeah. So when you are able to approach things like as an archaeologist, as an archaeologist. Yeah, maybe I should start calling you like the Genshin archaeologist instead of like a Genshin lore theorist.
That's funny.
When you do build up like the parts or elements of your theories, like I guess when they start slotting into each other, you mentioned a while ago, or well, we weren't recording yet, but you mentioned that you have to keep like a lot of footage of, is it scenes, story quests that you have to keep going back to?
Everything.
Oh my.
I try to record everything. I've got almost 1 terabyte worth of footage right now.
Whoa.
So we're talking world quests, story quests, some very special commissions that you can get once and then never again, or at least are very rare to get again. I've got event quests, event locations. Like, I'm still kicking myself because last year's Golden Apple Archipelago, I didn't actually take footage of the sky in Fischl's domain, and I'm so mad.
Oh.
Because I thought I had, and I forgot, and now I can never have it again. Yeah, so like this year's, obviously I've been taking some footage, but like even this, I mostly record almost my entire exploration progress, and some of them I'll delete if they're just kind of like useless.
Yeah, like if
you never know if you're gonna stumble onto something. Like there's a couple of, like, I won't spoil it, but there's a couple of caves with very interesting things in there, and like, you know, you get that impromptu camera zoom in and Paimon says something, but like you have no preparation for it, and like if I miss those, I miss those. I don't have another shot at that.
Oh, that's tough. And that is a lot of recording. Like, wow. I feel like the equivalent of that for me would be like recording every Spiral Abyss run, regardless of like if I was doing it for leisure or just to make a guide about it. But oh my goodness.
Every Spiral Abyss run and every weekly boss run.
Yeah, and every domain run. I guess it kind of answers like a question I've always had, if all that footage was yours. Or like if you ever had to crowdsource footage, and I guess now I know that it's actually all yours.
I have a couple of things I have crowdsourced. Like I said, I didn't start making content until 1.3, so that means I don't have my own footage for Unreconciled Stars.
And that one comes up
that
a lot.
I had to crowdsource. Yeah, like a lot, and it's like the most irritating thing.
I think that when it comes to your videos, like, a lot of the videos I watch from you, or like, well, a lot of the videos in general, they usually do like a recap plus more. Well, some of them are like flat out recaps, or some of them are like flat out guides to like the region's history and stuff. But then the ones that do delve into like theories projecting forward, I always find those to be interesting, especially when they are proven right. And it happens kind of often. Like, it happens kind of often that you're able to predict stuff. So I was wondering, like, when you do project those theories, do you do it with, like, the intent of getting into the writer's heads, or are you going with what makes the most sense based on historical context, or do you have, like, this is going to be an interesting thing if it's proven right, so I'm going to throw it out there because, you know, like, how do you get to that point looking forward?
Yes, and yes.
Yeah. All right.
So the if you're trying to get something right, then you try to get into the writer's position because you're trying to figure out, well, what story is the writer trying to tell? So what is the most logical way that they would approach this, right? That's one way to do it. If you're pretty good at going through Honkai Impact lore and then going back even further, looking at like Gun Girl Z and looking at that story, and then going back even further to Fly Me to the Moon, and like if you look at like Hoyo's progression of the type of story that they want to tell over and over again, you'll start to see some patterns, and that can make things easier for understanding what kind of story they want to tell and probably the direction that they would most likely take. When I make those sorts of predictions, that's usually the first thing I go to is like, what would make the most logical sense for me if I was writing this? And then the second thing is like, what makes most sense in the context of the information we know so far and the information that I can glean from other games. Because the thing is, even if the lore from the other games doesn't apply, which it does sometimes and it doesn't other times, the themes apply, and you can also look for patterns in the way that writers think. I will say that a lot of the time, sometimes I'm just thinking about like, what would be really cool? And then I'll just make something on that. Like sometimes I will write completely crack theories. Like I wrote one about a missing harbinger. Like saying, okay, but there's actually 12 harbingers. Well, 11
I think I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, you go into that and you're not acknowledging like, hey, this is pretty unlikely, but wouldn't this be a fun idea if?
Yeah.
Right? Because like you gotta do some crack theories
every now and then.
Sometimes the crack is right. Sometimes the crack is right. And then sometimes it's just so much more fun.
I was wondering because you were mentioning like writing patterns and then themes and then, things that seem to be recurring. And it's kind of like, okay, if at some point they have been recurring throughout like Hoyoverse's previous titles, then wouldn't it sometimes get a bit too predictable? Has Genshin ever surprised you, even though you see these recurring themes and patterns from the writing standpoint?
Yes.
Yes.
But not in the way that you'd think. When Genshin surprises me, it's usually oh, that's where they're going with it, or a more like, oh, I didn't see it.
Choking noises.
It's more of that. It's more of that kind of feeling than a like, oh my god, that just happened.
Ah.
Kind of but like sometimes we get those. The Kari Bear quest was probably one of those moments where I was just like, oh, they went there, and I was like legitimately surprised.
Okay,
right. But yeah, like the story itself, I've said it a few times. It's not like it's particularly impressive,
and
like,
I can agree with that.
I do think Genshin's pretty hard carried by its world.
Yeah,
and by
its characters.
By the weird amount of appeal that their characters have.
Yes. Agreed.
And maybe that'll change. Maybe, the last few years have just all been a prelude up until Fontaine, and we're actually going to head into something really crazy going forward, which, real talk, that's an actual possibility. That is a real possibility. And if it happens, I will be legitimately surprised, but also very excited. If it doesn't happen, I'm just going to be ghosting.
I think, like,
I'm still enjoying myself.
Yeah, I feel like we could be, or I would hope for several surprises at this point, because I mean, if Fontaine is going to just to follow the arc of the French Revolution, like there are a bunch of literature pieces already.
It's not. I'll tell you this. Fontaine is gonna go in a direction that I don't think most people are expecting.
Oh, all right.
And I found this out by accident.
Okay, is this something
I was having?
You're willing?
I'm gonna make a video on it.
Okay,
I'll tease it. All right, so the thing about Fontaine, everything that I put in my last video, which was like historical context, that's all already happened for the most part, as far as Fontaine happens. So like this whole French Revolution thing, this whole Industrial Revolution thing, those are like currently in Fontaine, but I'm not convinced that's the primary conflict. I would argue that it is a red herring almost.
Ooh.
And that's kind of on theme with Lainey and Lynette. kind of being like, hey,
Yeah.
so what your eyes see is only an illusion. So there's that. There's definitely going to be a bit of a sleight of hand, and it greatly involves Arlecchino, and I think a lot of people are going to be really happy.
Well, if that's your prediction, I'm going to be pretty happy because, like, yeah, what you usually predict does it does often come to pass, which is very interesting.
I have a decent hit rate. It's not like absurdly high, but it's like it's more than half.
Which is, yeah, that's
I'd
pretty
say
good.
more than half.
That's pretty good. We've talked about what goes into your theories, your predicting, your research and things. Now, how do you actually translate that to content? You talked about the research phase. How about the writing phase, or how about like the writing phase? I'm curious about.
That depends entirely on the theory or the content. But I love outlines. Bulleted lists are my best friend.
Fair.
Okay, so I was a horrific note taker in school. In fact, I was a chronic doodler. I would doodle and I would never take notes, and I didn't have to take notes until college. And then college gave me grades for notes, and I was like, "Well, wait, how do I take notes?" And they're just like, "Well, you write things down in a notebook." And I'm just like, So I drew pictures instead, and I turned those in.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was like this whole thing at the time too. Like people were getting really into graphic facilitation is what it was called. And so like I turned my notes into graphic facilitations of the lesson, and then I was graded on those. So like I still to this day have no idea how to take notes, so everything sits in my head.
For the record, I've never heard the term graphic facilitation, but I guess that is what
Why
they called
would
it.
you? It's very silly. So like if I'm going to sit down to write any kind of theory, like basically the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what's my conclusion, like what is my actual point.
Okay.
And that is the last bullet in the list no matter what.
Okay.
And then I try to make no more than 3 main points. Sometimes that's unavoidable. I've got one gigantic video coming up where I'm going to make like a bunch of points, and you're going to wish you had a Paimon.
All right, can't
wait. I mean, like really, we're gonna go straight into philosophy. We're gonna be talking about a lot of philosophy. It's gonna be great fun. I can't wait,
stuff.
especially after this event, because this event just kind of fueled it. I usually do that. I'll do like 2 or 3 points, and then it's basically fill in the blank. So it's how do I get from point A to point B to point C to the end. And then I just keep adding sub bullets to add more details. I write outlines that are like 1,300 words long.
You have the bullets and the outline, and they can tend to be very long. A detailed outline, great. I'm sure there are.
And then I just write. The thing is like as I'm doing the outline, that's when the fact checking happens. It'll be like, okay, well, here's a claim that I made. Where did this claim come from? Okay, well, this came from Flowers of Paradise Lost, or this came from the Parametric Transformer. And then I'll be highlighting those words, and I'll be adding citations or links at the end. So that's when you'll see, like in my description box, I'll have like a whole link of like Wikipedia articles. So like I usually just put the wiki article, because like most people will like go to a wiki and read the first couple paragraphs and be like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now.
I actually have moments like that in like making my guides, because sometimes there are mechanics that it's like, if you really want to get into this mechanic, here's what you can do to learn about it, but I'm going to give you the extra simplified version of it.
Yeah, because doing that over and over and over again is a bit of a...
It is. Yeah. Did you write a lot of papers? A lot of research papers back in school?
No, I was a computer science major.
Oh.
So I've written a lot of code.
Oh my, okay. Because I was about to say, like, this sounds like very relevant, I guess, like in a degree or in research papers. Like, I know for me, when I was doing like my social science papers, it was often like that. But okay, you coming from a computer science degree, that is a different story.
Yeah, a little bit. But the other thing is that I worked in digital comics and digital comic publishing for a long time, and I've written a lot of books and a lot of comics at this point. And like I write a lot of fiction. Ooh. And I've been working on writing a game.
Oh.
which I have very little time for these days for obvious reasons.
Okay.
But I'm learning a lot through doing all this stuff with Genshin. So I'm hoping to apply all of the world building tricks and foreshadowing things. Like, Genshin is really masterful at the art of foreshadowing. Like, that is like their best skill, I think. It was explained to me at one point that like a good foreshadower, they work kind of like a magician, like pulling a sheet off of an object, but like extremely slowly. So you're just like watching the sheet move in like incredibly slow motion, and you can like kind of maybe see sort of a little bit of like context of what the object might be.
Yeah.
Underneath it, but like you really can't see much. Like, that's how it was always explained to me, and I've always had like a hard time really applying that because I'm a very straightforward type of person, and I just like to be like, this is what's happening. So that's always hard. So I think Genshin does a really good job with that in particular. They're very good at teasing things and making them feel incredibly cryptic, but then looking back at them and being like, holy cow, that was incredibly obvious. I feel ridiculous. I write a lot of stories, and I write my Genshin theories basically in the same process that I write my stories. I actually always start my stories with their ending. Usually when you start a story or you have an idea for something, there's usually like one or two scenes that you're like, yeah, that's it. That's the scene. That's the thing. So like, there's a few of those, so I'll write those in there, like in like a super rough order in which they may happen, and then I have to figure out how those all get connected, right? So you fill in the easy ones first, and then you go all the way back and you're just like, well, how does this whole thing begin then? And you start at the beginning, and then like you have a very clear path, but you still have all these options to throw in all those little tiny bullets of like all these little things that can happen in between.
One thing that I learned about you in our previous conversation is that you have played a lot of games, and you do play a lot of games. And I think the fact that you said you were working on writing a game, like, it now seems very on brand for you, like having learned all these things about you.
Yeah, well, I like games as a storytelling method. Everyone plays games for different reasons. I've almost always played games for the stories, and or for like the experiences. I very rarely play them for the challenge or the combat. Like, it's very rare that I do that. Even though I do enjoy those aspects, it's just not the reason I pick up a game. Okay. That's not going to sell me on the game, for example. But I think there's something special about being able to like physically not physically, but like get the sensation of physically moving through a space and through a world that somebody else has crafted. Because like books can do it in one way, but it's very linear. TV shows are the same. They can do it in one way, but it's very linear. Movies, same thing. Stage plays, same thing. But games are so non-linear. Even linear games are very non-linear when you think about them, right? Because like, even if you say, okay, well, you're the student and you're walking into a school and now like your goal is to go to class. Well, are you the type of person who's just going to like walk that kid straight to class? Are you going to go to the locker? Are you going to go talk to people? Are you going to like bum around? Are you going to look at your inventory? Like, what are you going to do? And every single person will probably do something incredibly different, right? Like, okay, maybe you talk to 3 NPCs, maybe you talk to 5, maybe you explore the entire school and check every clickable item before you even, go to the next objective.
Yeah, and then like in Genshin, like I remember when I was starting out, I was like, oh my gosh, how many apples can I pick up before I can reach my next destination?
Every experience is custom, right? Mm-hmm. I remember someone telling this story about have you ever heard of the game Journey? You're like that little red bell-shaped cloak thingy. It's got this long red scarf, and you're like joining all these other red cloaked things. You fly through desert regions and stuff like that. And there's no combat. It's just like you're just traveling. You're just chilling, man. But I remember them telling this story about like how they had this really fantastic experience with Journey, so they wanted their friend to play it. Mm-hmm. So they got their friend to play it, and they sat down to watch their friend play it with them because they were so excited about them. And like within the first 5 minutes, their friend glitched out of the zone.
Whoa.
On accident. And then they were still like able to play. And so they ended up having this completely unique experience in Journey because he just decided to go with it. And he like did the whole game, but like glitched out of the main areas. And I thought that was so cool because it just goes to show that even if you have a very linear, very straightforward story with incredibly simple mechanics, every single person gets a very different experience out of it. Because they're non-linear. So what that person takes away from Journey will be very different from what everyone else takes away from Journey, right? Video games are very unique in that way, which makes good ones very difficult to make. I like the challenge. That make a very good game? Probably not, but I'll have given it my best shot.
Well, that's a great approach to making anything, really.
I'll have fun.
I mean, it sounds like you do apply that to your YouTube content. Like, when you started, I mean, you said that when you started, it was just like, I was just doing it for fun, I think is what you said. And up till now,
I'm still doing it for fun.
Like, you do have your own job. You do have your own career. So, like, this isn't like you're not depending on this for livelihood. Do you have moments where it doesn't get fun and you, like, actively stop? Or how does it go for you, like, in the long run?
I have pretty good endurance for this sort of thing. I basically go until I get bored. The thing is I really, like, above everything else, I really love learning and I love researching and I love the feeling of discovery. Genshin, for all its faults, regularly delivers that for me. Whether it's in-game or something in-game that sparked that experience outside of the game. So I have a hard time getting bored with it. It does get tedious sometimes because I don't really like editing.
That's fair.
But the problem is like this type of content is very difficult to outsource. I have everything in my head where it is, what scenes I want to use and that kind of stuff, like as I'm writing things.
Yes.
So it's much faster for me to put together the video than it is to have somebody else do it. However, my time is theoretically better spent writing and recording than it is editing. I get a little burned out by that because I put a lot of hours listening to my own voice as I put in hundreds of clips in the proper order, and that drives me crazy.
How long have you gone without making a video?
A month. I didn't make anything for the entire month of June, but that wasn't because I didn't have any ideas. I had like a shit ton of ideas. Last week and a half, I have written 6 scripts from start to finish because I had that many ideas just sitting in my head waiting, and I've been so friggin' busy because of my job that had this massive timeline finagling that just ruined my life for 2 months, that I ran through my entire backlog and I had no time, like physically no time to actually sit down and make the content that I wanted to make. So like it's been a month. Yeah, so you'll see a couple of those coming. One of them is technically one that I rewrote 3 times. And I'll always miss things. That's the thing. Like I'll be explaining an idea to somebody and they'll be like, "Oh, hey, but wait, what about this, this, and this?" And I'm just like, I forgot that was a thing. That helps me so much, or that ruins my entire theory, or like it can go either way. Like I wrote and recorded one theory and I did it just before the Fontaine teaser drop. I have to update that one now.
I can imagine, because like if you just choose to not acknowledge them, then it can either look like a hole in your theory or just like, I guess, a hole in the video.
Like it just wasn't addressed, yeah.
So like you have shared your opinions on Genshin storing lore in their artifacts and objects and making it feel like an archaeological expedition. Would you change any of that?
Yeah. I actually think there's one change they could make to that would make everyone's life easier and also encourage people to look at those without actually making them feel like they have to slog through all the reading.
How would that
be? That would be the inclusion of having one image that would show up for every artifact or every item that has that kind of lore to it. Like, so you get like little pieces, like in the if you go to like weapons materials, right? Like usually you get like a little tiny snippet of text. Like they're very rarely over like a tweet long.
It feels like flavor text.
You don't really, Yeah, I mean, like, it's flavor text, but it is lore. Like, it is still something that I'll reference, right? But, like, usually it's not really in depth. But imagine if you had, like, the Crimson Witch of Flame set, right? And you've got 5 artifact sets, and you could have one, like, still image for each one of those artifact sets that depicts something important that happened in each one of those artifact sets. Like, even if people don't go in and read them, they will go look at the pictures. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they'll get the idea. They'll understand what happens, more or less. Or maybe that will entice them to read part of it, or maybe it will help them visualize the context. And I think that's like the biggest quality of life that they could do for people who are just like, this is too much, this is too taxing. Because like pictures, you get it instantly. Like, you just understand like the gist. Most people only really need the gist. That's what I would do, I think, especially with artifacts.
Your suggestion on like having pictures or art to go with the descriptions of the artifact sets, like I would actually love to see that, or on the weapons as well, because I remember reading
weapons
like,
as well, 100%.
I remember reading the descriptions of the Seaphos Moonlight series, I think, and I could understand what was going on, but I felt like I was lacking a little context.
See, even that one's hard.
Yeah.
That one's hard even for me, because like you actually have to understand the entire timeline of the desert to know what's going on.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
From you know the literally from the primordial one forward. And then Zephos is like at the very end of that line, at the very end of that Gurabad story. Very, very end.
It's a long history.
Which is neat, because most, like, this is the cool thing though, because like most games that you play that have like intense world building don't even have that level of detail for their entire game, if you think about it. And you get this for every single region, and that's baffling to me.
I think that when I did realize how old Teyvat's lore went back, and how they had several civilizations that have already gone extinct, but they all had their own details and stories, that I guess that kind of blew my mind, because, you know, I was approaching this from like a bit of a noob standpoint when it comes to video games and their storytelling, because the video games I play usually don't have that big of a story. So when I came into that and realized that, I was like, wait, shit, this is like a big world history. Like, it's not just a civilization history, it's not just a story history, it's like a world history.
Yeah. I think that is literally the most impressive part of the entire game. I really do. I really, really think that, because like it's so difficult to, I've said this so many times already, but like it's so difficult to write that level of detail and like to keep it cohesive and still have it all work within one like united Genesis tale, for lack of a better term. In a book, you can't do that. Like you can't add all of those extra details, because it's all just fluff that someone has to read.
Yeah.
But when you're in a video game, this is again like one of the things that's so impressive about video game storytelling as a medium. Like, you can hide all this stuff and it's all optional. It's environmental. It's part of your experience. You can read it, you can look at it, you can touch it, you can break things. Like you can't add all of that optional content and detail into a book or a TV show or a comic. Like you just can't. There's a limit.
The limit in this game is kind of non-existent, I suppose. The limit is your attention span.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
We are limited to our attention span, 100%.
Yeah. When it comes to those who are interested in making similar content as you, or at least making a lore-centric content, would you have any advice to share?
Keep it simple. I think Aster, Chill with Aster, actually has one of the best approaches when it comes to creating lore content, because like on the one hand, like it's really nice to create videos that are impressive to look at, or at least like visually engaging to look at, but she almost approaches her content like a podcast style. And she said she deliberately designed it that way because she wanted it to be easy to produce videos, to be able to share her ideas easier. And that's why she's able to put out so many videos and so frequently, is because they're very low effort. And I think not low effort in terms of her writing. Like, her writing is really good, and her recording is really good, and her ideas are great. I mean, like, low effort in the part that she considers the most time consuming and taxing part, which is the editing, which is what I agree with. But I apparently hate myself, and so I will edit them however I edit them. But I'd say just keep things simple. If you're starting with your first theory, or trying to share a theory, or trying to explain a theory, it's really good to start with a simple one, because it's very easy to get distracted and to confuse your ultimate point. And it's really important to know what to keep and what to throw away in terms of like supporting your argument. Like, I won't say I'm amazing at it, because I'm not. But like, it's something I'm hyper conscious of, is like, how many points do I need to provide to support my argument before it's too many?
I definitely...
Before, like, my point actually gets lost.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I understand that. Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is reach out to other lore people, not just, like, content creators, but, like, just people who really like lore. Because you'll get so many great ideas, you'll get so many great feedback, and it really helps keep you motivated, because people get really excited, and having that kind of community is great. And then obviously that also builds your initial audience. Also, don't steal things. I have had a script stolen from me and made into a video before. Because like sometimes I will share an early draft of a script on my server with people, just to get like some preliminary feedback. And so like I'll keep the sharing settings open on like a Google Doc for a while. But like in this case, someone actually took it and then basically just like kind of rehashed it, which doesn't sound bad, but then you realize it was like one of my really bizarre crack theories, and I knew it was mine because on not only did they present the argument in the exact same way that I did, like in the order that I had done it, but it was way too coincidental for them to be doing anything on this topic, because literally no one has ever done one on this topic. And I'd be like, well, what are the odds of this happening at the same time when I've had this written? And I also knew that it was wrong, like it was mine, because in the very first draft, which was the one that I shared, I had tried to use a very wrong explanation of entropy and why it worked with my idea. And I eventually scrapped it for the final draft because it was wrong and it didn't work. But they used my wrong example in their video, so I knew it was mine, like without a doubt. So don't do that. I know we're talking about theories for video games, and a lot of people can have the same ideas, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, it's just one of those things to be very careful of. Be very careful of whether or not, like whether you're citing people. So one thing I make sure to do is, because I'm in a lore content creator group, if I have an idea that was sparked by somebody else's stuff, I will ask them, are you okay if I take this idea in this direction and reference you on this? Right? Because like sometimes people will get really excited about a topic, and then I'll be like, well, wait, are you going to make a video on it? Because I won't make a video on it if you're going to, because obviously you started this idea first. So you should have that. Like ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. But like, because we're working in Theory Town, it's actually just really nice to credit the people who had the idea originally, especially if it's an idea that you would have never come to on your own.
I think your other point about like actually talking to others, whether creators or just enjoyers, it's something that creators can fall into the trap of not doing. And then if they don't do it, it ends up becoming a much lonelier process. And then you can start to lose touch of things. So
especially if you let YouTube comments get to you, because no matter how good your video is, how accurate it is, you're always going to get some level of negativity in there.
Yeah, that is way too true.
People will tell you, you talk too fast. They'll tell you, you talk too slow. They'll say, oh, like your dictation's wrong, your pronunciation's wrong. Why do you have music on this video? Like they'll say basically anything. And like if you're alone trying to face those things and you don't handle that kind of commentary very well on your own, having people around you that don't try to take everything you do and turn it into a critique is actually quite helpful.
Well, that was incredibly solid advice. Like, whether for someone starting out or who's interested in it, or maybe even like in the middle of their journey, it's still very solid and applicable advice. Is there anything else you would like to leave here on this little episode?
Oh wait, I got one! Take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. That's from the Magic School Bus.
Thank you, Magic School Bus. Well, that's how you learn. Ashikai, please plug yourself before we say goodbye. Where can we find you?
Go to YouTube, type Ashikai in the search box, and I pop up with a little red head that's smiling at you like she just saw into the depths of your soul.
Thank you. That was a very vivid description. I'm sure they'll find you right away.
I'm also on Twitter, but like honestly, I'm not that active on Twitter. I mostly go there to like look at pretty artwork. Follow me on there if you want to, but your timeline's gonna get flooded with Wanderer and Kaveh art, so maybe don't do that.
Unless you love Wanderer and Kaveh, then you know.
Yeah, in which case, come join.
That's the perfect place for it. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ashikai, for joining me on this podcast. It was wonderful to have you, and I would very much love to have you again in the future. And
this was really fun. I will happily join you again.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to know that. Thank you so much, Ashikai, for joining us. And thank you for listening. You can find this podcast on YouTube and Spotify. And you can also find me, Savvy Plays, on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. On our next episode, I'm going to have special guest Jenny Yokobori, Yoimiya's English VA, and I'm going to be learning a lot about the voice acting world and her career straight from her. So, with that said, I am going to see you all soon, and take care.